Let me show you one more story, and then I'll talk more about the platform. This is a 1 to 10 story that I'll show you here. In Filipino Sign Language, the same sign language that I mentioned earlier from the Manila region, they make stories using the numbers 10 to 1. So they start at 10 and they go down to 1. So on the first page of the story, we're going to have the full story using the hand shapes for 10 to 1. And then on each of the subsequent pages, we will have a portion of the story that uses each of those hand shapes. So I'll reach down here and switch the written language to English so that you can read, and I'll let you watch the entire video first. Again, as I mentioned before, this video will run on a loop until somebody hits the next page icon. So here we'll go to the page dedicated to the number 10, and you'll see just a slice of the story with the hand shape for 10. We also want to encourage students to understand the translation of these signs, and so we have put that down below. You can decide to get rid of the written language if you'd like by clicking on this icon. We really like this example for the purposes of developing written and sign language literacy, but also in understanding the interplay between these languages. We also feel like this could be useful for other communities to see those translations as well. We encourage communities to provide some of their stories, their unique community-based stories, to the database in sign language, through graphics, and in written language. And we've seen that teams of 3 may work together on the various components in order to create a new story and world around you. The American School for the Deaf is proud to sponsor the National Deaf Education Conference, which has created the NDEC Signs and NDEC Engage series this year. During the pandemic, we need to be creative and thoughtful about how we reach our communities, and NDEC has done that for our instructors, administrators, and parents. Thank you. What I've shown you so far has been what students would see when they access the platform. The other part of the software, of course, is how teachers and others would create programs and other levels of programs for their students. We do hope to have, as I mentioned before, a total of 200 stories, 50 at each of 4 grade levels, starting in preschool, in sign language. And of course, we want teachers to be able to match the level of the stories to the child's literacy level. We focused on the Global South because we do want these stories to contain accents of local cultures that can influence other people around the world. For example, Americans can learn about Indonesian culture. We feel like we should start with these other cultures who are under-resourced and spend our funding that way, and use further resources in the future to add ASL and other languages later. Anyone can be involved in this project. Family members, brothers, sisters, parents, etc. But we want to make sure that the FOSS principles that I mentioned earlier are followed. This means that this software should not be sold. Think about Wikipedia or YouTube, where people offer their content not for sale, and communities are involved in creating a website. That's the same concept we're using here. Teachers can create accounts to get involved in the work that we're doing and create news stories or translate stories into other languages, both written and signed. In America, we're lucky to have many children's books available to us. But unfortunately, we can't readily take those published books and translate them into stories. So we can't take a Dr. Seuss book and translate it for World Around You, because somebody has claim to that copyright. So we don't have permission to do so. FOSS principles state that because this is free and open source, we need to make sure that we have permission in order to put stories into the database, specifically stories that would not be for sale. We hope then that educators and others who would like to get involved can create their own stories, short stories to include in the database that have pictures, written language, and sign language. As I mentioned before, people can work in teams. So if you feel that your skills are in graphic design, but you're not a great signer, then see if you can find somebody in your community to develop the sign language portion of your story. This will also strengthen networks of deaf people in localities. Creating an account will allow you to access the back end of the website, which is where you can create news stories. And I'll show you how that works. So if you click on the icon of the person in the top right corner of the screen, you'll see a login button. This is where you can enter information to create an account. I've, of course, already done this, so I'll log in with my account. Now, up in that top right corner, you can see a new icon that has a pen. If you click on that, you have the option to create a new story, a new piece of content for the website, or you can look at some of the existing stories and modify them for your languages. So in this case, some of these stories may not have a sign language recording yet. They may only have images and written language. So somebody else from your team can go into the website and upload their videos of this story in sign language. So let's find that same story we were talking about before. So I'll show you here what the builder and editor function looks like for an existing story, and eventually later I will show you what it looks like for a new story. Here you'll see each of the pages as different tiles. There's a language selecting area where you can pick the languages that you would like to have. So here you can go into a language that exists and clean up the language, or you can add a new language. In the case of a sign language, you might want to add a regional variation. Here you can see that we have a New York City variation for American Sign Language. You might want to add Black ASL. If that language does not yet exist in our database, you can add it by clicking on the plus sign at the bottom. As an example, if you want to use the dialect of American Sign Language that's used in California, then you would select the plus button and type American-Los Angeles. And it would show up here in this selected box. For now, I will use the existing languages. So stepping through each page, you can see that we have some information that we need to fill in. You can select the different languages and then add title and description. This story is from an organization called Pratham Books. And so we've credited them here in the description. This is a page builder. You can see that each page has at least 3 elements. They have a picture, they have a video of sign language, and they have a glossary. So once you upload an image, you can type some text, as you see that I'm doing here. I'll erase that and I won't save it so that I don't mess up this story. And at the top, you can see the language selector where you can pick different languages. So this is how we can change languages in the previous examples that I was showing you, because they're all loaded here into the same page. The same is true for different sign languages. So here we see the Jakarta, Indonesia sign language. We can select to Brazilian Sign Language, and so on. The way that we upload these videos is by clicking this button. You simply upload a video and save it. If you remember before, I showed you the sign for people. We can add keywords here by clicking the plus button, selecting the video, and then adjusting the time. So here we see the video for the entire page, and we have a selector where we can adjust the time of the video that specifically correlates to the glossary term. So once I've moved the 2 dots to the right space, I can save this and it will be added to the glossary. As I mentioned before, the glossary is what drives the ability to create games for each story. So once you've added text, signing, and pictures to each page, you can publish the story. You don't need to make a glossary, in fact, to publish a story, but it is nice to have. So that's what the editor looks like when you're editing an existing story. If you'd like to create a new story, it looks very similar, but it will be completely blank. Again, you have the language selector, and you might want to add English and American Sign Language. You might want to add a regional variety of American Sign Language for Rochester, New York, because we know that the Rochester method used a lot of finger spelling. And if you've been to Rochester, you may know that the sign for equals looks different. So if you look down the list and you don't see a language variety for Rochester, you can create one. So here I put Rochester, New York, because we do know that there are other Rochesters in the country, for example, in Minnesota. And we want to emphasize that we're talking about the Rochester, New York variety. Here we don't put sign language, just try to keep everything short. And then if we click on the plus button, it will put it into the selected language box. And now we can go ahead and write our story in English and the sign language of Rochester, New York. It's important that you remember to save along the way, otherwise you'll have to start again. So to begin, we'll add a photo for the book, artist, and author. We'll put a title and description, and then we can get into each page. You'll see here that the languages are selected as we made them. Once we've created multiple pages for the story, as I'm doing here by clicking on the plus button, we can continue with editing. If there's a page you want to delete, just hit the minus button. Here you see that everything is blank because I actually haven't created anything, but at the end, you'll hit the save button, and it will be published. That's the basic idea of the editor. Now let's talk about the game editor. So if you look at the stories that we have in the database, you can select one to create a game. I'll make one about the COVID pandemic from the perspective of the Philippines. I'll show you this one that's already been made. So here I've gone into the editor, but I actually want to go to the game selector. So you look for the icon of the game pad, like this, as you can see here, and select that. Next, you'll get the option to select matching or fill in the blank, like I mentioned before. Later, we hope to add other game types and templates to encourage bilingual gamification of the learning process. And all of these will encourage bilingualism by using both sign and spoken language. So here's a story that already has some words in the glossary. And we can pick the words that we would like to use to test the student's knowledge of these terms. So we pick the terms we'd like, and then we hit save. And it's really quite simple. That creates the game, the matching game. If we want to create a fill-in-the-blank game, we again hit the game icon, but at the top we go to fill in the blank. And this is where you would create a game for yourself. So if you click Create New Game, you'll assign the game a name. Here I'll talk about nouns because I'm focusing on nouns as an example. Then you can select in this selector the word that you would like needs to be chosen correctly. I'll select tissue for this example. Here you see the sign is being presented to make sure you've selected it correctly. Then you can type your example sentence in the box. Once you've done that, you can save the example and create other items to test on. So having saved this other example, I can now go to the quiz and see what it looks like. So remember, I have to go to the top to pick the other type of game, the fill-in-the-blank game, and hit play, and this is what I'll see. Remember, the first sentence was related to tissues. Hopefully it works. As I mentioned earlier, we do expect students to watch the story first and learn the vocabulary there before they play the game. So hopefully they will have known this term already. We see three options. One is correct, one is tissue, and if you select that, you'll get a gold star. Here's the second example. The virus is spread by attaching to liquid. We'll wait for the other options to appear. I'm using Zoom at the same time as I'm loading this game, so I think it's running a little slowly. But I'll select an incorrect option just so that you can see what happens. And there you go. As I mentioned before, the team grew this platform in order to encourage bilingualism among young deaf people. We want them to look at these stories in both written and sign language, and then to participate in the games to measure their progress along the way. We feel this is useful for parents as well, as they're learning sign language along with their children. We've also designed it with sign language appearing above the written language, and with the loop, we expect learners to reference both languages at different times in order to reinforce their meaning. We've offered definitions and examples to, again, scaffold language learning. The platform is open. There were some concerns about the quality of the language. Many times in new technology or disruptive technology, open source platforms, when they start, can have these concerns about where the contributions are coming from. We saw that many people were eager to contribute. And it's really up to the community to monitor the contributions and make sure that they are in appropriate language. In ASL versus spoken English, as an example. And if there is a contribution that comes in that doesn't seem to match that language or a dialect, that it be filed under a different language. We expect that stabilization to happen 2 or 3 years down the road. For now, we're still growing, and we're still in our beta test. We're open to anyone who would like to be a part of our community and learn more about the platform. If you'd like, please go ahead and open an account and get started. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. We feel like the website is pretty straightforward as to how to use it, and we hope that you will. We're looking forward to working with you to create more stories for deaf children, stories about the deaf community, popular stories, and other stories about the world to be made available to children the world over. We want to include not only national languages, but also regional variations that may include Black ASL, as an example, or the languages used by Latinx populations in the United States, or contact languages. Community involvement is really key at this point. We want to encourage the community to be motivated to provide more stories to the database, and we're happy to support that. What's really at the core of all of this is that the submissions follow the standards of free and open source software. We want metadata to be added to the contributions to know where everything is coming from and how it can be used. We also realize that some situations may warrant a splinter of this software, and that's totally fine as well if your school or institution would like to create its own library of stories. Teachers may want to create their own lessons. Anyone can be involved in the development of this software. That includes adding and sharing along the FOSS principles. I've been excited to present with you today, and I know my time is running short. Thank you for your time. Thank you for supporting this. This is an important program to make sure that students have access to resources the world over, especially in sign language, which should be their primary language of instruction. We want deaf people all over to be able to use this. We also feel like second language learners can use this as a resource as well. And we realize that having bilingualism at its core will help scaffold literacy among its users. We do hope that hearing members of the world will not use this platform to put new samples out to the community. We see enough of this on YouTube. Instead, we would like community members, deaf people, those who are fluent in sign language, to be the contributors to World Around You. We would love for hearing people to work in teams on the written language translations or on the graphic design, if that's their interest. With any questions, please be in touch.